I never thought I'd become this woman. Clarissa Vaughn, 45, living in a house that echoed louder than any silence I'd ever known. From the outside, everything looked perfect. A stone driveway, fresh hydrangeas in the front yard, a husband who wore tailored suits and flew first class for business. But behind closed doors, I was disappearing. Marcus, my husband of 12 years, was always gone, weeks at a time. When he returned, he barely touched me, barely looked at me. Our conversations were hollow, like reading lines in a play we no longer cared to perform. I stopped asking where he was going or when he'd return. I stopped asking for anything. I smiled at neighbors, played hostess at dinner parties, laughed at jokes I didn't find funny. I was playing the role of wife, but I hadn't felt like a woman in years. Some nights I'd stand by the window in my robe, watching the streetlights flicker, wondering if anyone even remembered I was here. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I was numb, and that was worse. Because when you stop feeling, you stop living. And I had stopped. Long before I ever met the one person who would make me feel seen again. It was early April when everything quietly shifted. The sky was just starting to warm, the trees blooming with cautious optimism, spring pretending it didn't remember winter. Marcus had left again, this time for Shanghai. Just 2.5 weeks, he promised, with a kiss on the cheek that felt as cold as a receipt. I didn't protest. I never did. I folded his shirts, packed his carry-on, and watched him disappear into another Uber, like he always did. 3 days later, the door opened unexpectedly in the late afternoon. I heard it before I saw him, keys jingling, the sound of size 12 sneakers hitting the floor. "Hey, Clarissa," came the familiar voice. Aiden, my stepson. He hadn't told us he'd be coming home for spring break. At 22, he was in his last semester of college, tall, lean, polite. I had practically raised him since he was 13, but with that strange emotional formality that often exists between a stepmother and a teenage boy. We were cordial, distant, respectful. We coexisted. He always called me by my first name, never Mom. But something was different this time, and I felt it within minutes. The way his eyes met mine when I walked into the foyer. The way he held that gaze a beat too long, not inappropriately, but with something heavier. Like he saw me, not just as Clarissa the wife or Clarissa the woman who cooked dinner, but me. "You look beautiful," he said after our quick hello. It was the way he said it, not the words themselves, softly without performance. I laughed it off. My instinct was to dismiss, deflect, return to safe ground. But I felt my stomach flutter, and that unsettled me. That evening, he offered to help with dinner. I handed him a cutting board, and we moved around the kitchen like we'd done 100 times. Only this time I noticed how close he stood, how his arm brushed mine as he reached for the basil. I didn't move, and he didn't apologize. After dinner, we sat on the couch, watching some forgettable show. He leaned back, legs stretched out, relaxed in that way only someone young and unburdened can be. I caught myself glancing at him, at the slope of his jaw, the curve of his smile when he said something funny. And when I looked away, I realized he had been watching me too. The air was thicker than it should have been. Over the next few days, small things kept happening. He'd linger in the kitchen with me longer than necessary, ask if I needed help with groceries, suggest walks in the late afternoon. None of it crossed any line, at least not visibly. But beneath the surface, something was changing. One afternoon, while sitting on the back porch as the sun dipped low behind the trees, he turned to me with a look I hadn't seen in years. "Can I say something without it sounding weird?" he asked. I nodded slowly. I admire you," he said. "I don't think Dad ever really saw how much you do, how you keep everything together, how strong you are." I froze. No one had said anything like that to me in a decade. Marcus praised spreadsheets, not souls, complimented dresses, not devotion. I swallowed hard, unsure what to say. My throat tightened. I felt seen, truly, deeply seen, and I didn't know how to accept it. I told myself it was innocent, just a thoughtful comment from a respectful young man. But my heart wouldn't slow down. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, the shadows on the wall, replaying every word, every glance. Every moment I had let my guard slip. My body was still, but my mind was racing. I told myself this was nothing, that I was just flattered, that I was lonely and foolish and reading into things that weren't there. And yet, the next morning when he came into the kitchen, hair tousled, t-shirt wrinkled, and smiled at me like I was the only person in the room, I felt something I hadn't in years. Desire. It terrified me and thrilled me. I had done nothing wrong, not yet, but emotionally I had already crossed a line. I found myself watching the clock, counting down until he'd walk into a room, listening for his footsteps in the hallway, noticing the curve of his shoulder as he leaned on the counter, the way his lips moved when he spoke. One morning while reaching for a mug, his hand grazed mine. I didn't flinch. He didn't move. It lasted barely a second, but it felt like lightning, not the dangerous kind, the kind that wakes you up from a deep, numbing sleep. I told myself it had to stop, that I had to find some distance. But the next time I turned around, he was there, close enough to smell the cologne on his neck. He smiled gently, and I felt something inside me unravel. This wasn't about lust. It was about recognition. After years of fading, I was being pulled back into focus. Not by my husband, not by duty or vows, but by someone who saw the version of me I had buried so long ago. And that scared me more than anything. The night it happened, everything felt unusually still. It was a Thursday, the kind of evening that crept in slowly, heavy with the kind of silence that made you aware of your own breath. Outside, the rain started without warning, sharp at first, then relentless. The windows fogged over, the lights flickered once, then cut out entirely. Just like that, the house went dark. I lit candles, tiny glows of warmth in a house that hadn't felt warm in years. Marcus was still overseas. The silence stretched into something unfamiliar, not just quiet, but expectant. I had just finished a lonely dinner when I heard the soft creak of the stairs. Aiden appeared in the doorway, holding 2 glasses of wine. His shirt clung to his shoulders, slightly damp from checking the breaker outside. "Thought you could use this," he said gently, stepping into the golden candlelight. I hesitated but took the glass. His fingers grazed mine. We sat on the couch in silence. The rain became our background music, the kind that made the world feel distant, blurred. The flickering candles cast shadows across the room, and for a moment it felt like we weren't in my living room at all, but in some place outside of time. He sipped his wine, then looked at me, not like a stepson, not even like a friend, but like a man who had been holding something back for too long. "You don't even realize how incredible you are, do you?" he said suddenly, his voice a low whisper. I blinked. "Aiden." He didn't look away. "I mean it," he continued. "You give so much, and no one sees it. Not really, but I do." I should have stopped him. I should have said something about boundaries or propriety or the fact that I was married to his father, but I didn't. Instead, I let his words land, let them seep into the hollow places I'd stopped acknowledging, places Marcus had walked past for years, never noticing they were starving. "I feel like I'm fading in this house," I whispered, unsure why I was confessing anything at all, like no one sees me anymore. "I see you," he said, and his voice cracked just enough to make me believe it. His hand reached for mine, gently, not possessive, not eager, just there, and I didn't pull away. The contact was electric and terrifying. It was soft and slow, like something inevitable. I could feel every heartbeat in my fingers. He leaned in, eyes never leaving mine. Even then, I had a chance to end it, to draw a line, to stand up and walk away. But I didn't move. When our lips met, it wasn't rushed or frantic. It was deliberate, slow, like he was afraid I might vanish if he moved too quickly. Like he was learning the contours of someone who hadn't been touched like that in a very long time. The kiss said everything neither of us could. It was tenderness, it was hunger, it was heartbreak, and it was wrong. When it ended, the room stayed still. The candles flickered but didn't go out. He looked at me, searching for my reaction. I stood up, legs unsteady. "I need to go to bed," I said softly, not looking back. I climbed the stairs with my heartbeat pounding in my ears. My body still remembered the feel of his lips. My skin still tingled from his touch. Sleep never came. I lay awake, staring into the dark, replaying the moment again and again. My thoughts were a blur of guilt and longing. What had I done? What had we become? It wasn't just a kiss. It was a betrayal. A line not just crossed, but erased entirely. I should have been consumed by shame, but instead I felt alive, for the first time in what felt like forever. The next morning, the kitchen was filled with sunlight, like nothing had changed. But everything had. Aiden walked in like he always did, casual, calm. But there was something different in the way he moved. Quiet confidence. Like he wasn't sorry. He offered to make coffee. I nodded, eyes down. Neither of us mentioned the kiss. But the silence was heavy. It wasn't avoidance. It was awareness. The kind that buzzes beneath the surface of every word, every glance, every breath. When he stood behind me to reach for a mug, I didn't step aside. When his fingers brushed mine again, I let them linger. And that terrified me more than anything. This wasn't just a moment, it was a choice. And though we never spoke about it, the truth was clear. I had crossed a threshold. I wasn't just a lonely woman anymore. I was someone caught between guilt and the desperate need to feel wanted. And the worst part? I didn't want to go back. The day after the kiss, everything should have felt like a disaster. I should have felt sick with regret, overcome by shame, unable to look him, or even myself in the mirror. But I didn't. Instead, I moved through the day like I was floating just above the surface of my life. Cooking breakfast, feeding the dog, folding laundry. It all felt familiar, but distant, like watching someone else's memories from behind glass. I had done the unthinkable, and yet I couldn't stop replaying it. Not with guilt, but with longing. Aiden entered the kitchen that morning with that same easy presence, as if we hadn't shattered every boundary the night before. He greeted me with a soft morning and started cracking eggs like this was just another spring break morning. I couldn't meet his eyes, not because I was ashamed of what we had done, but because a part of me wanted more. The silence between us was no longer empty. It pulsed with memory, with the unspoken, with the weight of a kiss we had both chosen. I told myself it had been a mistake, a single moment of weakness in a house too quiet for too long. But when his hand grazed mine again, when he stood close enough behind me that I could feel the heat of his body, I didn't step away. I couldn't. Because something inside me had already broken open, something that had been dormant for years, something soft, female, fragile, and aching to be touched. Later that day, I caught him watching me again. Not with lust, not with guilt, but with intent. His gaze followed my every move, every tilt of my head, every turn of my wrist. It was as if I was a song he had just discovered and couldn't stop listening to. It unnerved me, it thrilled me, and it pulled me further from the woman I used to be. He started spending more time in the house, less time texting friends, less time making excuses to go out. He lingered in hallways, in doorways, in moments, and I let him. We began sharing long conversations over tea, over errands, over nothing. He asked about my childhood, about the books I used to read, about the dreams I had given up when I married his father. No one had asked me those things in years, maybe ever. And with every answer, with every story I shared, he seemed to see more of me. And I let myself be seen. One afternoon, I finally said what had been weighing on me. "This can't continue, Aiden," I whispered, my voice trembling. "It's dangerous, reckless. We crossed a line and we can't pretend we didn't." He didn't argue. He didn't make excuses. Instead, he looked at me with a kind of quiet sadness that twisted something inside me. "I know," he said, "and I'm sorry. I can't stop thinking about you, about how you deserve more than being left behind by someone who barely notices you exist." I turned away, but his words sank in, deep. They reached parts of me even I had forgotten existed. That evening, while I was reading on the couch, he sat across from me, saying nothing, just watching. When I finally looked up, he spoke, softly but with absolute conviction. "You don't have to keep pretending," he said. "You're allowed to feel something again." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. because the way I looked at him told the truth I didn't dare speak. We had passed the point of no return. What followed wasn't rushed. It wasn't some reckless fall into lust. It was slow, deliberate, built on the thousands of unspoken things we hadn't dared say aloud. A touch here, a glance too long there, words wrapped in hesitation, but feelings too loud to silence. I told myself I was still in control, that I could stop it before it went too far. But I was lying, and I knew it. The woman I had been, dutiful wife, perfect hostess, picture of poise, she was slipping. Every day Aiden stayed, I saw her more clearly, fading behind the woman I was becoming. A woman who didn't want to be ignored anymore. A woman who wanted to be seen, wanted to feel something real, even if it came with fire and ruin. And yet, every time he looked at me with that quiet reverence, that soft intensity, I forgot the world we were betraying. I forgot my vows. I forgot my name. All I remembered was how alive I finally felt. And that scared me more than any consequence ever could. The days slipped by faster than I wanted them to. I kept telling myself we had time, that maybe we hadn't gone too far yet, that we could still hold the truth quietly between us without letting it swallow everything. But spring break was coming to an end. And with every morning that brought Aiden one day closer to leaving, the air in the house grew heavier, not with tension, with dread, the kind that settles in your bones and whispers. This is all temporary. He started packing on a Tuesday afternoon. I stood in the doorway of his room, watching him fold his clothes. His movements were slower than usual, like he was buying time in seconds. There were no words between us, just the sound of fabric and the rain tapping lightly against the windows again, as if the sky remembered the night everything changed. I wanted to say something, anything, but I didn't know what I was allowed to say. There was no definition for what we were now. No rules, no roadmap, just a broken compass and the knowledge that we'd crossed a line we couldn't uncross. That evening, he didn't sit next to me on the couch like he usually did. He sat across the room a few feet away, staring at the television, but not really watching. The silence between us had changed. It wasn't the charged silence of temptation anymore. It was the silence of goodbye. When I finally spoke, my voice was quiet. "You leave tomorrow." He nodded, then looked at me, not as the boy who'd kissed me, but as the man who didn't know how to walk away from me. "I don't regret anything," he said softly, "but I don't want to ruin your life either." His words hit harder than I expected. I swallowed. My throat burned. "You haven't ruined anything," I whispered. "You reminded me I'm still alive." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That night we didn't touch. We didn't kiss. We didn't even sit close. But I felt closer to him than I had to anyone in years. That somehow was worse. The next morning he left without a dramatic goodbye. There were no tears, no confessions. Just a hug at the door. Tight, lingering, final. And then he was gone. I stood there for a long time, hand on the doorknob, staring at the driveway long after his car had disappeared. The house felt hollow again, but not in the same way it had before he came home. This time, it felt emptied, like something had been ripped out and taken with him. I went back inside, sat down at the kitchen table, stared at nothing. I thought the guilt would come rushing in, but it didn't, not at first. What came was grief. Quiet, aching grief for a version of myself I had touched and tasted for just a moment, and then had to bury all over again. When Marcus returned 2 days later, it was like stepping into someone else's movie. He brought back souvenirs, spoke about meetings, joked about jet lag. He kissed my cheek and said, "You kept the house in one piece." I smiled, nodded, made dinner like I always did, played the part I had rehearsed for years. But inside I was gone. He didn't notice the way I avoided his eyes, didn't notice how quiet I'd become. He talked through dinner, reciting sales figures, forgetting to ask how I'd been. I realized then it was never about the kiss, or even about Aiden. It was about being seen, and now I was invisible again. I checked my phone that night, not expecting, not hoping, but still, and there it was, a message from Aiden. "Take care of yourself." 4 words, that was all. I stared at them for a long time, rereading them over and over, like they might change into something more. Then I deleted the message, because I knew we couldn't go back, and I also knew I couldn't go forward. I was stuck in between, living beside a man who thought everything was fine, carrying a secret that burned just beneath the surface of my skin. At first I thought silence would be the worst part, but it wasn't. The worst part was pretending I was still the woman he left behind, because I wasn't. Something in me had cracked wide open. I had touched something too real to forget, too dangerous to keep. And now I had to live with that. Not in scandal, not in drama, in silence. I had learned the hardest truth of all, that sometimes the greatest punishment isn't being caught. It's not being caught. It's knowing that you betrayed your vows, your name, your reflection, and still no one sees it. I kept moving, kept cooking, kept smiling, but inside I was haunted by a kiss, by a whisper, by the version of me that woke up and realized she had been asleep for far too long. The days after Aiden left blurred into one another like watercolor left in the rain, soft edges, faded meaning. I moved through the motions of life with practiced ease, wearing a mask I had perfected over the years. Clarissa Vaughn, the elegant wife, the calm hostess, the woman who had everything. No one saw the fracture lines underneath. No one saw the fracture lines underneath. Marcus returned to his routines effortlessly. It was as if my betrayal never happened, because in his world, it hadn't. He talked about new clients, weekend conferences, a potential investment opportunity in Dubai. He kissed my cheek in passing, held my hand at dinner parties, but his eyes never lingered, his voice never trembled, and his love, if it ever existed, had long since turned into something quieter than duty, habit. I had been faithful for 12 years, faithful even when I was starving. I waited. I hoped. I convinced myself that marriages went through dry seasons, that intimacy fades, that being invisible was just part of growing older. But now I knew better. I hadn't fallen into Aiden's arms out of weakness. I had fallen because I was empty, and someone finally saw that emptiness and didn't look away. But now that he was gone, I was left with the echo of that truth, and it was louder than I expected. Some nights I sat in the dark with a glass of wine, staring at the chair where he once sat. I could still see him there, legs crossed, head tilted slightly, eyes studying me like I was a painting no one had ever taken the time to understand. He had listened when no one else did, asked about who I was before I became Marcus's wife. He made me laugh at memories I'd buried, and when he kissed me, he didn't see a woman who belonged to someone else. He saw me, and that was the most dangerous part, because once you're seen, truly seen, you can't go back to being invisible. But that's exactly what I had to do. I stopped checking my phone. I stopped replaying that night. I stopped letting my heart write letters it could never send. Because I knew the rules, knew the boundaries I had crossed, and I knew that no matter how quiet our secret had been, I'd carry it forever. No one else needed to find out. The punishment was already mine to bear. At first I expected guilt to consume me, but guilt never came the way I thought it would. What arrived instead was grief. I grieved the version of myself that had waited for Marcus to notice. Grieved the nights I cried in silence while he snored beside me. Grieved the woman who used to believe that loyalty alone could keep a marriage alive. I didn't cry for Aiden, not exactly. I cried for what he reminded me of, who I was before I became furniture in my own life. I cried because now that I had been woken up, I couldn't fall back asleep. And yet I did what was expected. I smiled at brunch. I hosted his business partners and their wives. I wore pearls and poured wine and made small talk about vacation homes and private schools. But I had changed, and change has a way of leaving fingerprints no one else can see, but you feel them every time you look in the mirror. One evening, while folding laundry, Marcus walked past me and kissed the top of my head. A familiar gesture, one he had done 100 times. But that night, I felt nothing. No warmth, no resentment, just absence. I realized then that I didn't hate him. I didn't blame him. He hadn't done anything to me. That was the point. He had done nothing at all. And in that nothingness, I had withered. The kiss with Aiden hadn't destroyed my marriage. It had revealed its ghost. And now I lived beside that ghost, quietly haunted by what I knew, but could never say. Weeks passed. Spring became summer. Aiden didn't return, and I didn't expect him to. He had sent one message: take care of yourself. And that was his goodbye. I honored it. I deleted it. But I never forgot it. And sometimes in the silence of an afternoon or the hush of twilight, I whispered it back into the air like a prayer I didn't believe in. Take care of yourself. Because that's all I had now. Myself. I wasn't looking for redemption or revenge or even closure. I was just trying to live with the truth. And that truth was this: love without attention becomes habit. Attention without commitment becomes temptation. And somewhere between those two, I had lost a part of myself I could never retrieve. So I went on. Not forgiven, not punished. Just changed. Forever. It's strange how life keeps moving, even when something inside you has stopped. I still cook dinner at 6. Still water the plants on Sundays. Still fold Marcus's shirts the way he likes, even though he never notices. On the outside, nothing has changed. But inside, the silence is different now. It isn't numbness. It's awareness of what I've lost, of what I'll never get back. Sometimes I catch myself staring at my reflection, searching for the woman Aiden once saw. She's still there, buried under duty, wrapped in routine, but I feel her, quiet, pulsing. A reminder that I was once more than this. There are moments when the memory of his hand on mine flickers like candlelight in a dark room. Not because I want to relive it, but because I need to remember that I was once wanted, once chosen, once seen. I live now with a kind of quiet dignity, not in shame, but in truth. Because in the end, the real betrayal wasn't the kiss. It was how long I waited for someone to notice I was dying inside. And when someone finally did, it was already too late to go back. Life lesson. Sometimes the greatest wounds are the ones no one sees, because they're carved in silence, in neglect, in the slow fading of who we once were. This story isn't about betrayal in the traditional sense. It's about what happens when someone feels invisible for too long, when love becomes habit, when presence becomes absence, when duty replaces connection. The truth is, people don't just wake up one day and cross lines. They drift, quietly, painfully, over time. The lesson here isn't to justify the choices made, but to understand what led to them. Don't wait until someone is emotionally starving to start noticing them. Love at its core is about attention. Real connection isn't grand gestures. It's the everyday effort to see your partner, to make them feel valued, alive, and heard. Because if you don't, someone else might. And by the time you realize they were slipping away, it might be too late. So listen deeper, speak softer, look closer, love loudly while you still can.